Time is the only witness that never lies, but in Rain City, even time can be bribed. I stood in the center of Kronos Sons, the finest clock shop in the district. It was 3 a.m., but the room was deafening. 500 clocks, grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks, pocket watches all ticking out of sync. A chaotic symphony of gears. In the middle of this mechanical forest lay Elias Vane, the master clockmaker. He was slumped over his workbench, a magnifying loupe still stuck in his right eye. Cause of death, a single, clean puncture wound to the heart. But here is the anomaly. Every single clock in the shop, all 500 of them, had stopped. Not at random times, but exactly at 10:14 p.m. The police chief, Captain Holloway, looked at me. It's poetic. Vance, the old man died, and his creation stopped in mourning. Machines don't mourn. Captain, I said, putting on my gloves. They obey laws of physics. I checked the main grandfather clock. The pendulum was held in place by a small metal pin. Someone had intentionally stopped time at 10:14 to create a perfect narrative, to fix the time of death. I stood there, listening. Usually, silence is heavy. But here, the noise was heavier. 500 pendulums swinging back and forth, chopping the air into tiny, meaningless slices. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It sounded like the heartbeat of a nervous gent. The shop smelled of grass polish and old wood, but underneath, there was the metallic tang of blood. It's strange how blood smells like rusty iron. It fits this place perfectly. A shop full of metal, ending in a death by metal. I looked at Vane's face. He didn't look peaceful. He looked surprised, like he had calculated every second of his life, but forgot to account for the fraction of a second it takes for a heart to stop. The Silas Vance files, Case 004, the clockmaker's heart. I met the grieving apprentice, a young man named Julian. He was shaking, his hands covered in oil and soot. Who would hurt him? Julian sobbed. Mr. Vane was a saint. He fixed watches for the orphanage for free. I looked at Julian's hands. Observation. Oil stains are normal for a clockmaker. But under his fingernails, I saw yellow traces. Sulfur. Where were you at 10:14 p.m.? Julian, I was at the cinema. The projector broke halfway through, but dozens of people saw me. A solid alibi. If the clocks were right, and Vane died at 10:14, Julian was innocent. But my gut told me the clocks were the first lie of the night. Back at the office, I wiped the board clean. The rain lashed against the window like gravel. I pinned up 3 photos. Suspect 1, the rival, Marcus Thorne. Motive, greed. Thorne owns the cheap digital watch factory downtown. Vane's handmade clocks were the only thing stopping Thorne from monopolizing the market. Evidence. Thorne was seen arguing with Vane earlier that day. Counter-argument. Thorne is a businessman, not a mechanic. The murder weapon was a precision to a steel winding key filed down to a needle point. Thorne has fat, clumsy fingers. Suspect 2, the nephew, Leo Vane. Motive, debt. Leo owes $50,000 to the syndicate. He inherits the shop if the old man dies. Evidence. No alibi. Counter-argument. Leo is terrified of blood. He fainted once when I questioned him on a jaywalking charge. A precise puncture wound to the heart requires a steady, cold hand. Suspect 3. The apprentice, Julian. Motive, jealousy, or something else. Evidence. The sulfur on his hands. Alibi, the cinema. Verified by the ticket stub and witness accounts. But alibis rely on when. If I could prove the when was a lie, the alibi would crumble. Everyone has a motive if you dig deep enough. In Rain City, Innocent people don't exist. Only people who haven't been caught yet. Look at Marcus Thorne again. He wears Italian suits and checks his digital watch every 2 minutes. He represents the future chief. Fast, disposable. He hated Vane not because of money, but because Vane represented the past. A past that Thorne couldn't buy. And Leo, the nephew. He looks at the floor when he talks. Is it guilt? Or thus the crushing weight of a $50,000 debt? When you owe the syndicate that kind of money, you don't sleep. You just wait for the inevitable broken kneecaps. Killing his uncle might seem like a mercy compared to what the sharks would do to him. I returned to the crime scene. I didn't look at the body. I looked at the clocks. The police assumed the killer stopped the clocks manually to confuse the investigation. But to stop 500 clocks at the exact same second manually is impossible, unless it was done from the inside. I dismantled the master clock, the regulator that controlled the shop's timing signals. Technical analysis. Inside the brass mechanism, I found a tiny modification. A copper wire attached to the escapement wheel. It was connected to a radio receiver. The clocks weren't stopped by hand, they were stopped by a signal, a remote kill switch for time itself. Then I looked at the victim's masterpiece, a complex pocket watch sitting on the workbench, labeled Project Alpha. I opened the case back. It wasn't a watch. The mainspring wasn't coiled to drive gears. It was coiled to strike a flint. The escapement wasn't measuring seconds. It was a timer. This wasn't a timepiece. It was a detonator. Deduction. Elias Vane wasn't fixing watches for orphanages. He was building timer fuses for the recent string of bombings at the docks. The sulfur on Julian's hands wasn't from a movie theater popcorn. It was fulminate of mercury explosive primer. I held the mechanism up to the light. It was beautiful. In a sick way, most bomb makers are crude. They use alarm clocks and duct tape. But this was art. The mainspring wasn't standard steel. It was a high-tension alloy, designed to snap with the force of a pistol hammer. And the escapement gear. He had filed down every second tooth. Why? To double the speed. This wasn't just a timer. It was an accelerator. It meant that 10 minutes on the dial would actually run out in 5 minutes. Vane wasn't just selling bombs. He was selling uncertainty. He built machines that lied to the people holding them, a perfect metaphor for his life. The realization hit me. Elias Vane wasn't the victim. He was the supplier. And Julian wasn't the grieving apprentice. I found Julian at the train station, carrying a heavy leather bag. Going somewhere. Kid, I asked. He dropped the bag. It clanked heavy, metallic. He was going to sell me out. Vance, Julian said, his voice changing from a scared boy to a cold professional. The old man wanted to retire. He was going to hand the client list to the police in exchange for immunity. So, you killed him, I said. I didn't just kill him. Julian smiled. I used his own invention against him. I stabbed him with the winding key at 8 p.m. Then I went to the cinema. At 10:14, right in the middle of the movie, I pressed the button on this. He held up a small remote transmitter and stopped every clock in the shop remotely, creating the perfect alibi while I was sitting in a crowded theater. The twist, the clocks didn't stop because Vane died. They stopped because the killer decided that was the time of death. Julian reached into his coat, not for a gun, but for another watch. This one is set for 10 seconds. Detective, he sneered, winding the crown. Tick-tock. He threw the watch at me and ran. I had a choice. Chase him or catch the bomb. I dove. I caught the silver casing in midair. Logic process. A mechanical timer ticks. If you jam the escapement, you freeze the time. I didn't try to defuse it. I smashed the watch hard against the concrete floor. The gear shattered. The spring snapped. The ticking stopped. Julian made it to the platform edge, looking back, expecting an explosion. Instead, he saw me standing there, holding the broken pieces of his time. I raised my service revolver. Time's up, Julian. We found 6 more bomb watches in Julian's bag. Enough to level City Hall. The newspapers called it a tragedy. Beloved Clockmaker murdered by crazed assistant. I let them print it. The city didn't need to know that their kindly old timekeeper was a merchant of death. I walked past the shop one last time. The police had removed the seal. The 500 clocks were ticking again. But they were all showing different times. In Rain City, truth is like a broken watch. It's only right twice a day. The rest of the time, you just have to listen to the ticking and hope it doesn't explode. Good night, Rain City. Next time, the painter who used blood to make the perfect shade of red.